Hello everyone and welcome to Word on the Street, Election Edition. So, for Word on the Street, we always come together and we talk about whatever current events that's happening in the workplace, with the workforce, and I give you my take on what's going on. Well, for the Election Edition, we're bringing in people who are currently in elected positions and folks who placed their hat in the ring to say that they want to take on those elected positions, to explore how they plan to lead, right? So joining me here today for Word on the Street Election Edition is Nathan Vasquez. He is currently the Senior Deputy District Attorney for Multnomah County and has worked in the DA's office for 24 years. He actually started as an intern there. Fun fact, all right? So he's gonna walk us through why he wants to be the DA and what his vision is for Multnomah County from a DA's perspective. So let's get started. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So should I call you Senior Deputy District Attorney? Is that the formal?
My formal title is Senior Deputy District Attorney, but you can just call me Nathan.
Just call you Nathan?
Yep.
All right,
please.
Right on. So Nathan, I want to ask you, share with us why you became a prosecutor to begin with. Just kind of like high level, why were you ever interested in being a prosecutor?
Well, I love that question. It really actually, for me, started in my childhood. I had the great fortune of having one of those figures in your life who was so monumental, and that was my grandfather, William Vasquez. And, he immigrated from Mexico and grew up on the streets of San Francisco. He put himself through medical school, literally by selling papers on the streets. And after he became a doctor, he was a real community doctor. And I remember as a child going to my grandparents' house and staying there on the weekends. And we would see families come through the side door of it. And what I later learned was his office, because he could never turn it off. He always served the community. And in that part of California, there was a large Latino population, and he would often take payment in chickens and eggs, and he was just someone that, whether he was doing birth and delivery or surgery, he just was there to serve. Going into the role of a prosecutor was very natural. It just fit with kind of my life path. I had gotten a degree in political science with an emphasis on public service, and so for me this was very natural. And also I came up to Portland in 1998, and I went to law school here in Lewis and Clark, and I fell in love with the city and the community, and it was amazing. I was a small town kid, and this felt like a major metropolis, which many of us know it really isn't that big of a city. But what I loved about it was that it had this feel of people were so nice, you could walk around. There were so many diverse and wonderful neighborhoods, and it was a place that I really fell in love with and decided this is where I want to raise my family.
So 24 years with the same employer, rare, rare. And now you want to become district attorney. Why? And why now?
Well, now is we're at I think a critical time here in Portland and Multnomah County. And the reason is that I do love this community, and I raised my family here. I have two amazing kids. I have a wife, beautiful home. I love it here. But I can tell you that in the last few years, I really believe as a community we've struggled. And I've seen a lot of changes that when I reflect upon, and I ask myself, as someone who is a public servant, who's dedicated to providing public safety to this community, am I proud of that? And when I started looking out into the community, the clear answer was no. I know that we can do better. I worry every day when my son walks from school back down to the bus stop. I know the route he walks. I know what he sees. I know that he walks past, whether it's people smoking fentanyl or people in mental health crisis or people out just wildly committing crimes. And it left me in a place where I thought, I know if I'm feeling this and I'm hearing it from other community members, I know that we can do better as an office providing public safety.
Absolutely.
Another big component to this was that I saw the conditions within the office, and I saw just an unacceptable turnover of our workforce. And I saw for the first time in my career, gender discrimination suits coming out against management and the elected DA. And I found that to be wholly unacceptable. And I want my office to be a place where people feel valued, welcomed, and a place that where people want to come to. Throughout my career, the district attorney's office in Multnomah County, it was the leading office throughout the state. It was where everyone wanted to be. Now I think we struggle with recruitment, and that's not at all the place I want us to be. I want us to be back in that top spot.
Right. I want to double click on workforce turnover. I mean, we're an HR firm, right?
Sure.
So you've identified that there's a pattern of workforce turnover. What do you think is the cause of that?
It's both morale and leadership, and that's a consistent theme I hear, because I try to check in with employees regularly to see how they're doing, what's going on. I think also we've looked intensely at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there's some real issues in our office, and I think there have been some attempts to address that, but they've fallen short.
And when you say real issues, are you talking about diversity from a representation of the workforce standpoint, or where are you coming at diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Oh, I think there's a few different ways to look at that, but one is I think feeling like there's enough transparency that people that maybe come from various backgrounds feel like they have a fair and equal opportunity and shot at promotions, at advancement in the office, at being valued. I think that what we see is that we've had a few surveys in our office about this. There's been 2 different ones, and they've both been very concerning. I serve on the DEI board, and so we evaluate those surveys, and I'm not going to say that I was shocked by the results, but it certainly saddened me because I want our office to be a place where everyone feels welcome, valued, and feels like not just that their work is valued, but they have the opportunity to advance in their workplace.
A lot of people, when they're running for office, they forget about the workforce that they'll be leading. They do. But you're double clicking on the workforce right now, which is a huge testament to how you see them, likely because you've been working with them for 24 years, right? Folks flowing in and out of the DA's office. What are just a couple of the things that you think you could do as the DA to change the morale and the retention of the workforce?
Yeah. I mean, number one that I hear on a regular basis is training. For our attorneys that come in, oftentimes they come out of law school and they're asked to do a very difficult job. We do not have a training program that is in place to help young attorneys. We simply just give them some files and tell them, jump into court and see what happens. And that doesn't make anyone feel good. I went through that many years ago, and I've always believed it should change. I have worked hard when I'm not handling big murder cases and things. I am trying to train young attorneys and to help them. So that's one area that definitely, for morale, has to change. But the other big areas that I see when we talk about the workforce is these repeated gender discrimination claims have really brought us down. And I think that's something that has to be addressed and has to change.
Can I pause? Yeah. Gender discrimination claims lodged inside the DA's office.
3 different women have put forth claims. One was settled by the DA. One was very contentious and in the papers, and eventually actually Boley weighed in and said that there was enough evidence for that they substantiated the claims. They are still, I believe, evaluating and working on that one. And then again, recently there was another complaint that was lodged. So it's been disheartening, to say the least, because when we talk about, double clicking on the workforce, for me, being there for 24 years, this is my family. These are the people that I am with every day. I share with them their successes. I share with them when the hard times. When people have children, we all get together and celebrate. When people have deaths in their family, we come together to help them. So this matters to me personally.
Wow. I didn't expect that conversation to happen.
When looking at kind of all the factors that led me to why I wanted to run for this particular office, absolutely, wanting to improve community safety was top of the list. But right there with it was the fact that I felt like the employees in my office were not being served. Many of them came to me and asked me and encouraged me to run because they see that as well, and they want a healthier, better work environment.
Thank you for that level of transparency. I mean, those claims are big. Okay, I want to transition now. You had an interview on KGW 2 months ago. And I watch KGW religiously after work. And so I was pleasantly surprised to see you there kind of talking about your run. During that interview, you spoke to a lack of prosecutions being due to a broken relationship between the DA's office and the Portland police following the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. Do you believe that the more lenient policy set out by the current DA during the protest was a mistake, and why?
So to be very direct, yes, it was a mistake. But I want to be clear with some things first, which is that first, I deeply value everyone's right to peacefully protest and demonstrate. I think that is a vital part of our democracy and a vital part of Portland's and Multnomah County's community. And so that's very important. And what I also, I think is really important in understanding this is that during that time, in 2020, which everyone in the community lived through and saw, we saw some amazing, powerful demonstrations and marches, and ones that were extremely impactful. And I was down there working every day and night, and so I was there late into the morning hours. And the majority, particularly in the beginning, were wonderful protests. And I think of the one on the bridge at Morrison, and and that one in particular, it just gives me goosebumps and tingles when I think about it, because it was so powerful and beautiful. And there's an extremely important message that was being forwarded. Unfortunately, at the same time, there was a smaller group of individuals that were trying to take advantage of that, and I believe distract from the very important messages that the Black Lives Matter protests were putting out. And they started to really engage in violent, destructive behavior, setting fires, doing all types of things that I don't believe that's what the movement was about. I think this was a separate kind of anarchist-styled group that would engage in this. And so as we're moving along and we're going through this, in the middle of all of this, Mike Schmidt came into office. And really it was disappointing that really his first act was one that was done without any collaboration, without any consultation. Not with his current DAs who had been working and dealing with this for years. I can tell you that 2020 certainly was not the first protest I worked on. I can remember dealing with these issues going back, not just into when the destructive nature of Donald Trump coming into the presidency and what problems that caused in 2016, but all the way back into 2000. I mean, this is something that I've dealt with really throughout my career. But there was no consultation. But not just consultation within the district attorney's office, but there's no consultation really with any of the law enforcement officers. And what we saw very clearly was that this caused two distinct problems. The first was that, and I'll certainly try to be fair to Mike Schmidt in that these weren't the words that he wrote, but the message that was received very clearly from law enforcement officers was that he didn't value them, that he saw them entirely different and treated them kind of as a lesser or lower class. And that was received loud and clear from them, and it was something that I think affected them deeply. For the men and women that were out there every night and that were dedicated to really looking at issues of how do we prevent fires and very destructive behavior. And the other message that was received loud and clear, which again, I'm not saying this was how the policy was written, but it was certainly received this way, was that those individuals that were bent on violent actions, they very clearly received the message that Mike Schmidt didn't want to prosecute them, was going to give them free rein. And what I saw and what the police heard on really a nightly basis were individuals who would come out and would chant things like, go ahead and arrest me. Daddy Mike or Uncle Mike won't prosecute me. and then they would engage in very violent behavior. And I think from my perspective, as someone who has dealt with, mass demonstrations for years, is that that type of violent, unchecked behavior, it really acts as a suppressant upon people who actually want to come out and peacefully demonstrate and protest. And it is, it was unfortunate that we saw both that division that created with law enforcement, but also I think we saw some really negative consequences as well.
You said during the KGW interview, which we were just talking about, that police relations with the DA's office have got to be repaired. How will you go about repairing those relations?
To repair this relationship, I have the head start of 24 years of working directly with officers. The men and women of various law enforcement agencies, whether it's Portland Police, Gresham Police, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, the Port of Portland, I've been there with all of them. And that doesn't mean just a few meetings with the command staff or posting a few things on social media. I'm out there with the everyday patrol officer on the ground. I ride bikes downtown with the bike officers. I do stolen motor vehicle missions out in East County, and I've worked in Gresham for years. So they all know me, and they know that they can count on me to deliver when I promise something and say I'm going to do something. They know that that will happen. And so what I expect is that immediately they will have a trusted partner, someone that they can rely upon, someone that will listen to them, and someone that's going to hold them accountable if there are problems or issues.
So you're still doing the bike rides with the cops right now?
Absolutely.
Or did you just start it because you're running for DA?
No. I'm happy to scroll through my phone and show you some from several years ago, because, sadly, one of the consequences, we were talking earlier about, that broken relationship with police, is that we lost some amazing police officers. And what comes to mind is we had a bike officer that I worked with a lot. He built this program that was loved in the community of Portland. It was basically a program that you could register your bike on, and if it was stolen, the police would find it and return it, and gave this great connection between the community and the police. And as many of us know, Portland has a very healthy bike community, and so this officer was beloved. And I would do things. I would go into grand jury with him, and we would present a case, and the grand jurors would pull me aside and say, "Do you know who that is?" And I'm like, "Yeah, the officer I work with all the time." They're like, "No, but do you know who he is?"
It's famous.
Yeah. And I'm like, and it goes much beyond just riding around with the bike officers.
Which sounds cool.
It is. It's a lot of fun. It's great exercise, and it's a really an interesting way to see the city in a different way. But the officers also know me because for the past decade plus, I've been going to homicide scenes, whether that's vehicular homicides or just gun violence homicides. And this is something that I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with the detectives and officers, working on very tragic situations, and really kind of spending the hours and days with families to go through these really difficult times.
I want to ask a question about race. So we can't talk about policing and we can't talk about prosecutions without allowing race to come into the conversation. I think most people would agree that Black and Latino people are disproportionately affected by police violence and overrepresented in the prison industrial complex. As DA, how do you plan on addressing this epidemic? And the second part of this question is, does your race influence your approach to addressing these issues?
Well, first, as a Latino, these issues hit so close to home and are very important. And so the elected DA has a really unique opportunity to really affect change in this area. And this is something that absolutely I want to see improve and get better. And how we start is, when we talk about what the district attorney's most direct role, it's going to be in who we decide to send to prison, because the district attorney is going to advocate and about which individuals should go. And so these are something that through training and through an opportunity with the DAs, working with them and to better understand where the disparities are, what the roots of those disparities are, and how do we overcome them. That's the first step. And then from there, it's having a very clear and transparent idea of who are the individuals that are ending up in prison and who are ending up from our county, our jurisdiction. And so as the elected DA, that will be my approach, is to be not only transparent, but also very engaged with my individual DAs, because I'm someone that's been there through the years, worked on these cases, looked them over, and have really come to a place of understanding of when and how we can avoid prison when it's appropriate.
Right. Well, one of the things that made DA Schmidt appealing to people when he did run and win was that he was trying to interrupt the prison pipeline, right? He was especially trying to interrupt it for those who were disproportionately represented in the prison industrial complex. Now, there are a lot of folks who will say that the experiment was not a success, the approach, the strategy, whatever the case may be. But the reason why people were excited about him running and the way in which he was talking about reform, the reason why they were excited is because he was one of the first people running for a DA position talking about reform in a really tangible way. My question for you is, I don't think that sentiment has fundamentally shifted, right? I think people still are like, it's broken, but then the system is broken, yes. But this is not fixing the system, and now the system is worse than it was than at the start. And so my question for you is, how are you gonna balance that out?
Well, and I want to stick to that first part, which is, you're right, he came in running on this whole, he was gonna reform. But just as much as you like KGW, just what was it, a week ago, he was on KGW saying very clearly and touting how he was listing the highest prosecution rates that it really had been around for years and years. Really the exact opposite of what he ran on in 2019. And you know, this is where, if you want to see change, what you need is not a politician. You need a professional prosecutor. And that's what you get with me. I'm an individual that is dedicated to this community and to this profession. And how we obtain real change is by having someone who knows about these issues intimately and who cares about them deeply, but also isn't just going to tell you what you want to hear. Right on. Who is going to actually lean in and do the work.
But what is that sweet spot? I mean, I'm asking for you to show me the direction to where the rainbow starts, right? Like literally, how do you thread that needle in a way that actually interrupts the systems that lead to Black and brown people being disproportionately represented per capita in the prison industrial complex, and the fact that my catalytic converter was stolen on my Toyota 4 times in 2021.
Sorry.
I mean, it sounded like a monster truck, okay? I was deeply, deeply frustrated every single time. And the police said, no luck. Well, there's nothing that we can do about it. And I'm pretty sure the guy who stole my catalytic converter, I'm pretty sure I saw him down the street. I'm like, because he had like a bag of catalytic converters. But anyway, how do you strike the balance?
There is a balance. And you know what certainly it comes down to is being able, and what I train all of my young attorneys on is, you have to look at that individual. You have to look at their life history. And in that, absolutely, you look at those kind of diverse factors about what is their social, economic, and racial background. When looking at how do we best fashion an approach that hopefully will get them out of the criminal justice system. And that doesn't have to be prison. I'm someone that when I talk to my young attorneys, when I work with them, what I tell them is, you should always be looking for things like, what's the underlying issue here? Is it drug treatment? Is it mental health? Is it just they need job education? Do they need a better path? Do they need a mentor? Particularly when you're talking about young individuals. Do they need the types of life skills that are going to get them out of the system? Because I've always put out that sending someone to prison for 2-3 years, it's not necessarily a good approach at all, because it's not going to address those underlying pieces. You really have to look at, is it possible to give those individuals the life skills and the types of things that are going to get them out of the criminal justice system? But really, again, you need a professional prosecutor who is dedicated to that, who has looked over the risk assessments, who knows the system inside and out, and that can give you an honest approach to how we do reform.
It sounds like you're almost describing a social worker. I mean, but prosecutors aren't social workers, right?
When we're talking about how do we look forward into someone's life, because oftentimes, yes, prosecutors are coming in after the fact, after a crime has been committed. But we're also really kind of looking forward and saying, okay, how can we change the course of actions here? Because it's too easy, and it is not acceptable in my mind to just say, okay, this crime was committed, here's the consequence, let's all move on. Because if we're not doing things to help improve our community, and sometimes that is very much directed at how do we help improve that individual, then we are doing a disservice to public safety as a whole.
So Mike Schmidt ran on the platform to prosecute less, specifically to address problems such as school to prison pipeline and drug use being treated as a criminal issue rather than a health issue. Now, you were just talking about prosecutors basically taking on some, in my lay terms, social worker components. Are the issues of interrupting the prison pipeline important to you? And if so, how would you lead your office to combat this trend line if elected?
Well, those issues are absolutely important to me, and they're critical to a healthy community. Is how do we take individuals that are in the criminal justice system, and when appropriate, find avenues to get them out of the criminal justice system. And so to do that, we absolutely need to rely upon providing those life skills. Drug treatment, mental health treatment, in any number of other services that we can put forth to really give those life skills to get someone out. I would point out again that this is one area where the elected DA ran on this idea 4 years ago, and now is basically doing a 180 and is going in the exact opposite direction, touting how, his high prosecution rate, which is another data point that people should look very closely at when trying to evaluate the job he's doing.
So we talk about the prison pipeline, but let's talk about, does the DA have a responsibility to build relationships with the community? I mean, so I used to be the Chief Human Resources Officer at the City of Portland, which means that I helped manage HR for the police. And there was always this component of like community policing, building relationships with those that you are then policing and holding accountable, and the ability to de-escalate when you have relationships with the community. Does the DA have a role in building relationships with the community? And if so, how so?
Absolutely. In building relationships with the community, that's been one of my favorite parts of my career is the time I've spent out in the community. Many years ago, I built up a community organization called Renew out in the Rockwood area that was designed to bring together communities from all different backgrounds, to bring together police, to bring together the DA's office, so that we could address some of these very issues and look at how various communities of color were being disproportionately impacted. And also, I think another big point which should be made is that communities of color are also, sadly, disproportionately impacted as victims of crime.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I think that isn't talked about enough. And another thing that I have heard uniformly from communities of color is that oftentimes they get put into one voice or one set, and I don't think that's fair. They are very diverse in their beliefs.
We're not monolithic?
No, oddly enough, many different backgrounds have many different perspectives. The one commonality that I am hearing is that they still want to live in healthy, safe communities.
Absolutely.
And this is a huge issue that I think we're facing right now, and that we're just seeing massive disproportionality when it comes to victims of crime and being persons of color.
You've had critics say that you've played a part in reinforcing the systemic issues facing people of color, particularly regarding prison reform. How do you respond to this criticism?
I've seen those critiques, and they really sadden me. It's as a person that I've dedicated my life to this profession. When I read those, it was just, what struck me is, had they just taken any time to meet with me, talk with me, speak with any of the attorneys that have worked with me, they would realize that what they put out was just, wholly untrue. in my practice, I continually structure and work so hard to find ways to avoid prison when appropriate. At the same time, when it comes to violent crime, I will not shy away from the fact that I have worked extremely hard for victims and families when their loved ones have been raped, murdered. I've spent years prosecuting child abuse. And yeah, when appropriate, those people went to prison. And I have no qualms with saying that, because through the years, when you look at what I've done that work. I've been there with those families. I've cried with them over their lost loved ones. I've held the hand of a child to bring that child into court to speak out against their abuser. I've seen the power that child gained back when they got their voice and they saw that they were now free from that person who abused them for years. And those are really impactful things that I just wish my critics would take a little bit of time to look at and see. Because on the other side of the coin, the elected DA has never done that type of work. And that's surprising for many people to know, that he's never handled a homicide, never handled a rape case, never handled a robbery trial. He just hasn't done that work.
So what kind of cases did he prosecute?
He's handled minor felonies.
What's a minor felony for the lay?
Yeah. Like a car theft case. He's handled some car theft cases. A few. Yeah, he's handled a few car theft cases, maybe some other property crimes. But when it comes to serious person crimes, that's just work he's never done. So in the decades of doing this job, I can tell you those are some of the most impactful cases in our community. And if people just had taken a few minutes even just to look at who I am, they'll see that time and time again I've done that work. And I'm always happy to say, go and talk to the victims and see what they say.
So what is your stance on prison reform?
I believe that prison reform is absolutely appropriate and it's needed, and that you need a dedicated professional who can tell you where it's going to be most effective, because there are absolute opportunities for individuals where we can avoid prison, get them out of the criminal justice system. But when it comes to violent crimes, people need to be held accountable.
And where does that reform start? Like, what is the DA's role in prison reform? Because when I hear prison reform, I think the state, I think legislation, I think of those things. But then there are other people who have educated me over time who said the DAs actually get to determine the viability of a case that they pursue. They get to determine, basically to take it to court or not to take it to court. And you all could interrupt the pathway towards prison just on your day-to-day work. What do you say about that?
So I love these questions. I mean, these are hour-long discussions, but I'll give you a few quick bullet points I can put in there. Is that, yes, the DA has an absolute role when it comes to deciding what cases to put forward, deciding what sentencing recommendations to make. That's a big, big piece. And this is where you need that experienced leader who has prosecuted these cases and that can actually dig in to these topics and issues. So that's where it begins. But some of the other areas that people don't talk enough about is really in juvenile law. I spent years working in the juvenile system, and that's an area where you can have a massive impact. When you talk about prison reform, we see young people that are struggling, and if we really want to see change, we start there. You work with those kids, and you have an opportunity to really turn things about. And the last one I'll just quickly lead to is that people coming out of prison. How do we support them? Are we doing enough there? Your elected DA should be a leader in that field, talking about how do we really build out that part of the system so that when people are coming out, they can be successful and not see themselves return to prison, because that's a huge area as well.
I never even considered the DA having a role in when folks are released from the prison system.
There are several touch points where the DA is either attending hearings on, things of violations of parole, things of that nature. Also, there is an opportunity, if we talk about the Justice Integrity Unit, is to look at individuals that are currently in prison and make determinations about whether it still makes sense for them to be there or not. And the DA can have an important role in that as well. And it's something that I support in looking at and trying to understand, does this make the best sense for the community at this time?
That sounds exciting. I mean, we're getting close to the end of the interview, but I would love to know, like, where do you even find the time in a day as a DA to tackle 50% of the ideas for reform that you brought forward, right? There's ideas, and then there's execution and implementation, like deploying the workforce in a new way to get to different outcomes. And I think that's harder to achieve. What say you about that?
I really believe that, in the office currently, we have a very talented group of men and women who are so dedicated. And it is one where, with the right training, direction, and a leadership that they can trust and believe in, that we can make huge changes. Multnomah County should be the leader in the state of Oregon for these changes. And we have the people, we just need the leadership.
So are you saying that DA Schmidt did not come in and provide the infrastructural resources to create the change that he kind of talked about?
He talked about all these reforms, but really the office didn't change the structure. There's no structural changes. I think he kept when he came into office, he kept the entire management system in place. So it's not like, despite touting all this, I'm going to reform, none of that really came to fruition. So there wasn't that change. I can tell you what I see as a change, and what I know is there will be very direct changes when I'm the elected DA. We didn't even talk about all my work in strategic prosecution, which is a unit that I created in whole, which I believe is the future of prosecution, and which I know we would see better, more equitable results in public safety if that were.
Can people look into your strategic prosecutions process? Is it online where people can learn about it anywhere?
Yes, I have done a few different interviews about strategic prosecution. There are some materials on my website. There are other areas where that can be found, because that really is an opportunity for us to use data and look at public safety really, from beginning to end. You can see when people are coming in and struggling and they're in crisis, and it helps us identify them, to then, okay, what are some of the best results we can obtain through some of the services we can provide, and then we can use data to measure that and look at that. And that's a big piece. Two of the things I'm really kind of most proud about in my recent years is that work on strategic prosecution. Also, back in about 2019, before Mike Schmidt was elected, I began working on this program called the MAPS program, and that was to develop a community connection between the district attorney's office and with our community-based organizations. And it's that exact idea of how do we have that connection with the community and public safety to really achieve the outcomes and results we want. And so, in developing those two programs, I see those as highly successful and a huge opportunity for improvement in our community. And I mean, of course, I'm always going to look back on the cases I've tried and the work I've done. Representing the families when their loved ones have been murdered has been an honor, and it's the most challenging work I've had in recent years, but some of the most rewarding.
Okay, Nathan. So I have to ask you about the People for Portland ads that are out. I mean, they've been brutal towards DA Schmidt. Do you think their concerns are fair?
Well, let me start by saying, and I want to make this point very clear, which may be disappointing, is that I have nothing to do with them. They are a wholly independent group. In fact, by election laws, I can't have anything to do with them. But I want to be clear also that, what I'm hearing out in the community when I talk to the everyday voter and people is that they are magnifying the concerns that are present in our community. People don't feel safe. And unlike what the elected DA said on KGW last week about how really that's just the media playing up things, these are real concerns. And I think it's disingenuous to really almost really gaslight people into thinking that what they're seeing outside their door, what we're seeing on our streets every day, having our catalytic converter stolen 4 times, Those are real issues. And this is not something that you can try to just magically say doesn't exist. And it needs to be confronted. We've had, just horrific rates of homicide in our community. We've had horrific rates of car theft and violent crimes. These are real things. And to simply say that that doesn't exist, I think it does a disservice to the community. When the elected DA gives himself an A+, which he did, I think it really shows a lack of connection with the community that you are elected to serve.
A+. Huh.
That was what the Willamette Week reported.
There has most certainly been a shift in the safety level of the Portland area in particular. That's undeniable. But the ads are just kind of, Portland is a piece of Schmidt. Is that how it goes? That's just not nice. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you that, again, I'm not people for Portland. I would prefer much more that we talk about the issues, about the crime, and about the victims. I mean, that's really where I think our focus should be on, is the victims and the real people whose lives are affected. Again, whether it's their family car that's stolen, all the way to to those victims that have lost their lives. That's where I'm focused on.
So people have got to compare a vote for you versus a vote for D.A. Schmidt, right? So Mike Schmidt campaigned on the elimination of a cash bail. Is this something you want to overturn if elected?
Let me be clear with cash bail. Cash bail, it's an important topic, and of course, no one should be held in jail just because they don't have money. However, this is an absolute example of a failed policy of Mike Schmidt. He put this forward, and he pushed it hard, and it didn't actually occur. We didn't get rid of cash bail. They gutted the system at Mike Schmidt's urging. It was gutted, and it left us with a system that's full of loopholes. Mm-hmm. It's one where we see day after day individuals that will commit crimes, be released, and go out and commit more crimes.
The window basher.
Yes.
There have been multiple KGW stories on the window basher.
Are we talking about out in Gresham?
I mean, the storefront coming with the rocks and then getting arrested and then coming back and then with the same rocks and then doing it with as the business owner, we're at the Workplace Change building right now. We've got glass fronts at our building. I cannot imagine coming to my workplace, right? And we worked so hard here and having my windows. There was one person whose window was bashed, the same person multiple times by the same guy.
I wish that were an isolated example.
Yikes.
But what we're seeing and what the community is experiencing is individuals will go in, they'll go in, they'll get arrested, booked, and be out in 4 hours and be back to commit more crimes. And that's where, if you have a professional prosecutor, not a politician, someone who knows the system, that can build out something that actually will take into account those individuals that are in crisis and causing severe damage to our community. I mean, the issue is that not only is it terrible for the community, it's terrible sometimes for that individual who's wildly out of control. And we see them sometimes cycling up into very violent acts. And that's tragic for everyone involved. And it's one example of kind of some of the failed policies that Mike Schmidt put forward. Another one is, he was a big proponent of Measure 110. And again, we're seeing this radical shift by him. And it's, when we talk about these issues about disparities, his shift is one that, I think really starts to show that this is a political move, not something that he believes in. Originally, Measure 110 came in with some really high hopes about improving treatment, but I'll tell you my perspective, working in the system, the way that it was rolled out, the idea of just eliminating, any criminal consequence, it has led to devastating effects in our community. The overdose death rates have been just unreal, and it's terrible.
But didn't they say twice what it was previously?
It has to be way more than that, because last year we had close to 600 people overdose and die in Multnomah County alone.
Oh my gosh.
In Multnomah County alone. And just to be clear, I'm not a proponent for, hey, drug possession needs to be a felony and we need to be, having someone with that carried around with him. No, absolutely not. I believe that the criminal justice system can be a first point of intervention for people, and it should be designed in a way to connect people with treatment. That's what it should be. We should look at all different opportunities and avenues to treatment, and when we have that intervention opportunity, we should absolutely be taking that and seeing how we can connect people. Prior to Measure 110 and that, we actually had a drug court that was very effective. Now, could it have been improved? Absolutely. But the way it was simply eliminated, and Mike Schmidt eliminated it, it was a situation where now the people that are really at that first level and first opportunity for intervention, it doesn't exist. And we're seeing tragic results every day. And when we combine that with the cash bail, it's that kind of that same issue.
Definitely feels kind of like a cycle, for sure. Last two questions, all right? So what are some of the decisions made by the current DA that you would change? How would you change them? And what are some of the decisions made by the DA, Mike Schmidt, that you would keep or view as being a success?
When we talk about the decisions I would keep, the county in the last couple of years put together a DEI coordinator or director position for the DA's office. I think that being on the board, the DEI board, I think that's a wonderful position and it's absolutely necessary and critical. Unfortunately, under the current administration, we hired someone for a year. He was fantastic, really liked him. I worked with him, talked to him, had some amazing conversations. He lasted 1 year and left. And it was because management didn't support his efforts. And that's disappointing. But absolutely I would keep that approach. So
is it a vacancy now?
It is a vacancy now. It needs to be filled as soon as possible.
You hear that? Word on the street is that there's a DEI position available in the DA's office. Go check it out.
Yeah, and it's very needed and critical. The other things that, when we talk about things that we keep, the county also funded positions in our Justice Integrity Unit. And while I do have my concerns about certain issues with commutations that occurred, I believe that work is critical and we should continue to do that in a very transparent and appropriate manner so the community can fully understand that we can evaluate when appropriate to look at issues of what we call commutations and expungements and things of that nature, but it should be very transparent. The other areas that I think are critical, and I've already talked about this, is that strategic prosecution exists, but it's not being fully utilized. We have positions around organized retail theft and around the auto theft task force. These are not new ideas. These have been around for years and years and years. But if they were actually put in with the strategic prosecution, because we're talking about a true opportunity to use data to deal with these really critical issues in our community right now. That's something that I would keep, but I would definitely improve under my strategic prosecution model.
Nathan, I was at Dick's Sporting Goods getting my daughter a pair of high basketball socks because they're the coolest thing right now. And a person walked in Dick's at North Portland, and walked out with a kayak without paying for it. This is no baloney. I'm sitting there with my daughter to get these ridiculous socks at 7 p.m. after a long day of work. And she's like, we gotta have basketball tomorrow.
Yep.
Tomorrow, basketball starts at 9 a.m. We are in the line paying for some $17 socks. And a whole grown-up man walked out with a kayak over his hands. And I said, so why am I paying for these socks? Like, man, he can walk out with a kayak. Nobody stops him. But Cyril's got to pay $17.99 for these Nike ridiculous socks.
Cyril, I
was so frustrated.
You have every right to be frustrated, and you should be. And I want to turn you back to, let's not forget that when Mike Schmidt ran for office, he said he was going to get rid of misdemeanor prosecution, a lot of them, right? His first budget was to reduce the felony property crimes unit by like 40%. And that, what you're talking about, someone stealing a kayak like that is somewhere between a theft 2 and a theft 1. So it's in that range of, and sadly, those very decisions are what led us to, and I assume what you're feeling like is you're in this situation where you're in like no rules Portland. And it's like,
no rules. And the security at the door was like, well, we've been instructed that we call the police and we take down their license number and we just follow them out. My man wasn't even running with the kayak, okay? It was a leisurely pace. Out like, it's his. I said, did he buy that kayak? No, he's stealing it.
how is that fair for the rest of the community that's there?
How is it fair?
And I tell you that this issue is that two parts. It's that feeling of no rules Portland, but it's also this feeling of a crisis of confidence in our system of like, why aren't the police doing something? Why isn't the district attorney's office doing something? And it is a situation where it's time for change.
It's time for change. All right, so the last question that we have for you here today is one that's really at the root of what workplace change is, and the reason why we wanted to have the election edition, and that is leadership, accountability, and transparency. All right? And so my question for you is, if elected to become DA, how should the public expect for the DA's office to change in a material way, in a way that they could feel, right? Like, how will the DA's office change in a way that impacts positively the public, and the public will likely be able to feel that your leadership is present?
Well, there's multiple ways, both internally and externally, in which you do that. One, like I said, in developing strategic prosecution and the MAPS program. So the MAPS program, again, is that direct link to the community. And having the community, feel that change. It's having the DAs out there working with the organizations in the community, helping see public safety delivered to the people. So that's certainly one area. But I think also what you're going to see is a dedicated effort to get back to this idea that we can have accountability and compassion. Those two things it's not a binary choice. We can be compassionate, but we can hold people accountable. And that needs to happen. And I think we've lost that sense of accountability here in Portland and in Multnomah County, but we can get that back. When we talk about internally, absolutely what's going to change is these issues surrounding gender discrimination have to be dealt with, and that needs to be corrected and eliminated, because that's just unacceptable. When we're talking about the internal workforce, we have seen, sadly, time and time again, people just flocking out of the office. When we look at and we compare our office with other divisions within Multnomah County, our attrition rate, people that we're losing, is double what the rest of the counties at times. We've seen that in certain years where it's been double. And I know that just sitting here today, I know of like 3 to 4 people that are just either recently left or about to leave, and it is very disappointing, because these are young, talented attorneys, and we're not retaining them because of the morale issues and because of the feeling that leadership doesn't value them. So you absolutely need that leadership, the professional prosecutor who has been there with them. And I'll tell you that very much my style of leadership is I am both someone that believes you lead from the front and you lead from the back at the same time. And so how you do that very clearly is I'm a person who I handle the cases. I've been there. I've prosecuted with them. I've done this work. And they will continue to know that when they come to me, they have someone they can actually talk to and get information and answers about cases. But leading from the back is also really critical, and it's something that I say, and people say, those two things sound so, wildly different. And I go, well, if you come work in my unit, you'll understand. And if you talk to the employees that I've supervised, what you find is this. My goal is always to empower my young attorneys, to tell them what is it that is going to help you reach your best self. How are you going to improve in your career? I love to cite the example of a young man that I work with, and I admire him so much. Julian Samuels is this young guy he's such a hard worker, and he really he's the Tri-Met deputy, and he's just one of those individuals that you look at and you think, man, it seems like he's been here for like 10, 15 years. He's only been there like 3. And he recently put together an entire proposal to add an additional deputy DA to the Tri-Met unit, and put that forth to Tri-Met for them to fund. Now, he of course came to me, and I said, he's like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and I said, absolutely. I said, and he's like, well, how much do you want? I'm like, look, I'm your resource, but you're the person. You're going to do this. You have this. And I was blown away. And of course I supported him along the way, but he wrote that, put that together, and they funded it. And I will always be first to tell you, that position, that's because of Julian Samuels. It's not Nathan Vasquez, that's Julian Samuels. And I'm someone that I believe you empower your people, you give them credit where it's due, and you should always be looking to say, how do I help you advance in your career? And that's something as a leader I value immensely.
And congratulations to Julian Samuels on advocating and then reaping the rewards of that advocacy. All right, so I'm going to give you the final word. What would you like to say to close us out?
Well, what I would say to the voters in Multnomah County and the communities in Multnomah County is that with me, I am a person who's a professional prosecutor who's done this job for over 2 decades. I'm dedicated to this community. I raised my family here, and I am looking to make a change for our community. Of course, directly in public safety that everyone's experiencing on a regular daily basis, but also within the office to how do we develop, retain, and really have the most professional district attorney's office that can take on and tackle the many issues that we discussed here today, whether it is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or if it is those issues of racial disparity. You need a professional prosecutor who can lead this office, who is invested in this community and has been there day in, day out for the past 2 decades.
Well, thank you for joining us, Senior Deputy District Attorney Nathan Vasquez. We appreciate you just honoring us to answer our questions and talk about how you're going to lead, how you like to lead Multnomah County's District Attorney's Office to a new day. Thanks for joining us, and if you have any questions, jump into the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Have a good day.